Well, we did those horrible lectures, but I hope you use the terms from them, and you will if you want to get a good grade. And now we're into a series of short articles, mostly ethnographies, one of which you'll be writing as well. And the first one is sort of a follow up to the film we saw, The Gods Must Be Crazy. And it's about a group, which is a subgroup of the San, and they're called the Kung. And I'll explain the shortly. The article is entitled Eating Christmas. It's by Richard Lee, and I hope you read it before you watch this. However, this is going to go deeper than the article does, and you're going to need to watch this as well as read the article in order to answer the homework assignments. So here we go. They're located in the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. And as you can see, the environment is very bleak. One of the things we're going to be discussing all semester is the relationship of the environment to the culture. Some people, and we're going to read about this when we read about the sacred cow in India, think the environment absolutely determines the culture. Others think there's a range of possibilities within any environment. And I'll have more to say about that in a moment. But as you can see, they're landlocked. Now, they originally were called hunters and gatherers, hunting and gathering. And that was because men went into the field and they went off hunting with the boys. Let's go grab in this case, a poison spear and look for an elephant, giraffe, lion, or leopard. They weren't very good at it. And as women entered the field too, they noticed that up to 80% of their food actually came from the women when they gathered nuts, berries, gourds, and knew where little pieces of water were hidden underground. And so now many anthropologists have shifted to gathering and hunting rather than hunting and gatherers. And I would appreciate it, as would your mothers, if you use that term in your writings. The Kalahari Desert itself has, in the wet season, which is about half the year, 23 water holes, which is pretty good for a desert. But in the dry season, it dries up to 7. Now, there's could be a lot of competition for the use of the water holes, but the Kung have worked out a cooperative attitude, which means that through something called bilateral kinship, term you don't have to know, which is tracing your kinship on both sides, your mother and your father's side, they seem to all claim relatives to almost every group in the desert. So it's not an invasion of a water hole; it's just a family visit. Um, Now, this is where it's interesting because environmental influence or determinism. In Australia, there's groups that lived in a similar desert situation, but periodically they would fight over the resources. Basically, the same ecological niche, but one group is cooperative, one group is not, which tells us a lot about humans. We have a range of possibilities for culture. And the other part is they're nomadic, which means they cannot stay in one place for 2 or 3 weeks because they'll use up the resources. So they have to keep moving. Now, we've also learned using several branches of anthropology that they're probably, their language is, I'm going to sneeze now, which is not part of language. Their language, sorry about that. Thank you for saying salute. Their language is at least 400,000 years old. We know that from linguistics, and we know that because there's something called linguistic drift, and there's none of that. We know through our physical anthropologist friends that they have probably the oldest DNA of any human group on Earth, probably dating back to 100,000 years of isolation, technically before modern humans even developed. They've just had less interaction. And from the archaeologists, we found tools and paintings dating back 42,000 BCE or 44,000 years ago. BCE is before the Kalahari, before the Common Era. And we know also from the records that they used to live in a land much larger than they live in now, but they were pushed there during the colonialism. And if you look really carefully on the wall paintings, similar to the Neanderthal and many other groups, probably the pictures in the paintings were painted before the hunt to give the people control over the spirit of the animals. They have technology. Please don't think of it as primitive. They have a technology that works for them and their environment. Okay? We store water in reservoirs. They store water in ostrich eggs. We build our houses out of a range of possibilities. They build theirs out of branches and sticks. Their main hunting weapon is poison arrows. As I stated, they're very, very cooperative. You saw that in the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy. They don't even have a word for private property. And again, you could see cooperation as a technology as you could see being nomadic, because all of these factors are how they've technologically adapted. They also spread out their kids every 3 to 5 years. They have primitive forms of birth control, and they couldn't travel with bigger families. And in one movie, their technology was a Coke bottle, but that's Hollywood. They're under more threat today than they ever were. Outside groups have begun to graze cattle even in the sparse desert. That means they put up fences, which is a huge interference to their nomadic way of life and to the amount of game that can move freely. They've also had a number of their water wells poisoned. And in the 1900s, there was a bounty actually put on their head. Poachers are people that illegally hunt. And people have come into the Kalahari not during hunting season or without licenses to kill elephants for their ivory, to kill other animals for their skins. So they're very close, we're very close, and are at times close to starvation. They're certainly second class citizens. And recently, gem diamonds, meaning diamonds, have been found in the Kalahari. I don't know if any of you saw the movie by De Capua about this in another part of Africa, but it amounts to massive exploitation of the resources and the people. And now a huge part of their own territory in the Kalahari has been taken away from them because it's become a game preserve. Now, the click language is very important. So I'm going to give you a little dose of it right now. So he either said something about your mothers or he was describing where the antelope were. But here's the thing about the click languages. They've had it for over 40,000 years, which is really old compared to English. English, earliest form of English are about 1400 years ago. Modern English is about 500 years old. So think about this. They have a language 35,000 years older than ours. And if you look at the history of English, and you could take my course on evolution, and we actually do some of this, it came very, very late. Now, the click of the Kungs, the clicks are what we would call, are part of their language. They just happen to have, with the clicks, more consonants and vowels. It's a tone, and it was developed to mimic animals and used in hunting. So they would click their way through the hunt as a way to communicate. So again, adaptation influenced by the environment. Richard Lee, there's the young Richard Lee and the old Richard Lee. I know him a little bit. And he's a very, very nice guy. Um, but in the article, you'll see he kind of makes fun of himself. But in reality, the Kung probably wouldn't be there if it wasn't for him today, because he brought worldwide attention to their plight and still does. And he's actually created ways for them to get food and some protection. He came there to study subsistence patterns, how much energy it took to survive. Now, you're all going to work when you graduate college, and you're going to work 40, 50 hours a week if you could get a job. They work about 14 hours a week. And that was one of the things he was looking for. So it may look harsh to us, but I don't know, balance 14 hours versus 40. He angered the coup because he would not give them food, but only medicine and tobacco in exchange for information. Ethical situation. And he talks about this in the article. Um, if he's studying how much energy it took to get food, he really felt he couldn't give them food. And again, he looked at how the environment influenced their culture. He found them cooperative, nomadic, no ownership of anything, no private property. They didn't even have a word for anger in their language. However, they do, and one of his informants was somebody that, in a rare case of anger, had killed another person. There's a term called plasticity, which means that any humans could develop to fit the needs in any culture. I mentioned the group in Australia that lived in a similar environment, the Ainu. If a Kung was born in an Ainu culture, they would be more competitive. If an Ainu was born in a Kung culture, vice versa. Or look at the United States and Canada. The United States is so much more violent than Canada. But people born in the United States are raised and adjust a certain way, and people born in Canada adjust and are raised in a certain way. That's called plasticity. Now, another part that's really important is gift exchange. Have any of you ever gotten a gift from somebody when you weren't expected to get it? And what are you supposed to do then? It could be embarrassing. Um, my most embarrassing one was somebody gave one of our sons a gift. We weren't prepared because their daughter was the next week, and we pulled something out of the closet which they had given our son the year before. Oops. But a gift is a type of exchange. And there are three types of exchange. There's reciprocity. I give you something, you have to give me something. And the Kung have that. There's redistribution, which you're going to read about with the Tiv. Or in the Northwest Coast, there's a potlatch. The leader of a group gives away resources to the people, so everybody owes the leader, and it's a form of power. And we have what's called a market economy, and can look at exchanges as environmentally influenced. For the Kung, when one receives a gift, they are owed in the future something of equal or more value. And this creates social cohesion and mutual obligations. Again, they need cooperation to survive. Need to learn how to spell the word three. And it's something that is just expected. Plasticity. They have these gatherings during the dry season, which happens to coincide with your people's Christmas. As I mentioned, I am Jewish, not my problem Christmas. They celebrate it not the way it's done here, which is a capitalist venture that besmirches the holy nature of the religion, but as the birth of the white man's God chief. Whatever. They have huge feast. It's a time where several groups, which are called bands, gather. And again, it's the dry season, so several groups will come to the water hole. It's time for marriages. It's a time to exchange goods, trading, and just happy gatherings. And there's something they do also. Hey, man, it's going to be legal in New Jersey soon, but they smoke and they have trance dances. And they actually have specialists in their group that are trance dancing. So this might be an average Christmas um, gathering where they do trance dancing, and it's around the water holes. Now, field work is a term they should know. Anthropologists do participant observation. This is Lee in the field. You have informants, and I mentioned this in the lecture. You cannot, earlier dull lecture, but now it might be more interesting. You cannot talk to everybody, so you choose people. And who he chose really reflect his outcome. And in his case, he traded tobacco and medicine, but not food. They thought he was a miser because even though he lived with them, he actually had more access to food. They were sad when he was leaving. He says because they were losing their source of tobacco and medicine, but they also liked him. But they were glad, he said, when he was leaving because they thought he was a cheap guy. Now, the story centers around the Christmas ox. And you should know this. He said, I've been so selfish with you. So before I leave, I'm going to buy you the biggest possible ox I could find. And it was about 1,200 pounds. And they all started saying, oh, don't do that. Why insult us? You've been here 3 years and you still know nothing about cattle. It may be big, but it's all bones. And each one of them build up on the story. Even his wife, Nancy, said they got to be up to something. But one said, you're going to just cause fighting. So not with you, because we would never fight a white man, but we will fight because we're going to fight over the meat. Some said, after all this time, you should know better than to buy something that's not going to have much meat. Now, you notice these signs in front of Gialgo and Qua. These are just ways to try to spell out the clicks. So each one of them had a different story. Now, these were his informants. But when they actually slaughtered the ox, as they knew, it was huge. And they just started laughing. They had 2 days of dancing and feasting. It was 50 pounds of beef per family. And there were no fights. So they got a lot of burgers out of that. So the question was, why? Now, again, his informants, in his case, were all male, which again is something that was probably a mistake. One was the man that had actually killed somebody. 2 were Twanza, which are the neighboring tribes, and 1 was a specialist in trance dancing. So they all had their own points of view. And that's always important. That's been an issue with me whenever I do field work. You got to be careful doing field work, even on the projects you're doing this term, who your informants are. So he gave a speech at the end. And one of the things that the Kung do, if somebody's especially good at something, such as hunting, they just make fun of him because they need humility, because somebody gets above their raisins, think that they're bigger than the others. They lose that sense of equality and social cohesion. So Lee gave a speech about he was sorry if he was so arrogant and, blah, 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 blah. And he went to all his informants and said, why the joke? Why the joke? Why did you treat me like this? And he got the answer that anthropologists fear the most: because you never asked me. And that's something you got to be really careful about in field work, is to ask the right questions. So we learn a lot about the Kung in this article, but we also learn about the nature of field work. So you have an assignment after you do the reading, and you're going to learn more about field work when we move to West Africa and study another group called the Tiv.